Welcome back to the continuing adventures of the monad. In the last presentation, we briefly talked about the message that the world teacher, Christ-Maitreya, gave to humanity in his last incarnation. At this time, it was hinted that Christ-Maitreya himself was on his way somewhere. That somewhere was to go off and see his father. How touching. Now, being card-carrying Hylozoicians, you all know that when we use the Gnostic term father, we really mean either the third triad or the monad. What Christ-Maitreya was showing us in his last incarnation was the way of higher evolution. This newly described way, like the lighted way, has two phases. Consider yourself lucky. There are usually three ways to do most things. In the earlier stages of the unfoldment of Christ consciousness, the disciple takes the I3. This is known as transfiguration in Gnostic terminology. This is the path that the aspirant and the initiate disciple ascends on the path of discipleship. In treading the way of higher evolution, a cumbersome term if there ever was one, the initiate disciple treads the way of the Antahkarana and the way of higher initiations. It should be pointed out here that the I3 is regarded by the hierarchy as the first major initiation. The I1 and I2 are just considered preparatory stages. What disciples achieve at these stages is how to expand their consciousness, revealing the nature of the soul, the scope of the divine consciousness, and their relationship to their Father, aka the monad. These disciples become conscious souls incarnate. They have achieved continuity of consciousness. After taking the I4, the soul body, the causal envelope, is no longer needed and it is dissipated, being completely destroyed. Disciples are now free to tread the way of higher evolution. They are able to follow in the footsteps of Christ-Maitreya. This monad somehow managed, even though he only causalized at the start of the fourth, our planetary chain, to make it all the way through not only the human kingdom, but all the way to becoming a 43 self. Sickening individual. It is worth remembering that humanity is not sequentially going through its evolution. All stages of evolution are occurring simultaneously. There is, however, a general theme, which is emotional in nature. The reason for this is that the majority of souls incarnate today are still in the fourth root race. That is why at the moment we have two Manus, one for the fourth and one for the fifth root race. For the fourth root races, they still have a long way to go to achieve soul consciousness and soul control. The path they are on is the mystical one, leading to the preparatory stages of the science of invocation and evocation. These remnant Atlanteans must learn to tread the path by becoming the path itself. In this way, they will develop the mechanisms and capacities which are inherent in the divine mind. This process spins the thread of connecting light and relates all beings within the planetary ring pass knot itself. The disciple on their journey become the path symbolically. By a process of reorientation, the aspirant who seeks to tread the lighted way of purification and discipleship reaches a point where the light and the path bring the monad to a specific goal. It is at this time that the light generated within themselves and that they have been learning to use reveals to them the way of higher evolution. This tells them that there is still a greater goal ahead. This goal is termed by Christ-Maitreya as the Father's house. From the third initiation, the disciple passes on and takes the fourth initiation, I-4. It is at this time that the disciples experience a gap or hiatus separating them from their distant goal. This was represented in Gnosticism as the agony suffered by Jesus on the cross. We know Jesus never existed, and Jeshu, who was the vehicle for Christ-Maitreya, was stoned to death. Nevertheless, the symbology of the cross is very evocative of a dilemma faced by all initiates when they reach this stage along their evolutionary path. So, what is being represented here historically in the crucifixion scene? Jeshu at this time took the I-4 and had to make that leap across the chasm. We have spoken about it before as being the most difficult evolutionary step the monad takes in its journey back to plane 1. At the same time, Christ-Maitreya, who was overshadowing his most talented disciple, simultaneously also passed through an initiatory process himself. He was seeking to increase his enlightenment to better serve humanity as their world teacher. What the Master Jeshu had achieved when he took the I-4 was the culminating experience of the lighted way. This is the lesser of the two initiatory paths. Christ-Maitreya, on the other hand, had made the final effort which enabled him to entirely traverse the Rainbow Bridge and to go and meet his Father. He had just moved onto the first stage of the way of higher evolution. Imagine that. We have made a big deal about constructing the Antahkarana and think it connects the first and second triads. Yet, it is not the complete structure. Not by a long shot. The Antahkarana is only complete when the merged persona and soul unite with the monad, situated at the top of the third triad. Then, and only then, is the Rainbow Bridge complete. Why is it worth relaying the story of Jeshu's and Christ-Maitreya's struggle to take their respective initiations? Because the science of invocation and evocation entered a new phase when Christ-Maitreya came and presented himself before humanity. At this time, the world teacher summarized all the teachings that had been given to humanity up until this point and gave them the next installment. Christ-Maitreya opened the door of the way of higher evolution, a door that up until now had been closed. He was adding to the work already done by the Lord Buddha, who had epitomized within himself the achievements of the lighted way and the alignment of all knowledge and wisdom. Christ-Maitreya, in opening the greater door beyond the lesser door, had anchored the will of God on earth, for God read Sanat Kumara. This will has particular importance in relation to the consciousness of humanity. Christ-Maitreya lifted the entire science of invocation and evocation to the mental plane. This gift to humanity made possible a new approach to divinity. Again, realize here, when the word divinity is used, it is not about approaching God. That is the emotional way of thinking. For God, read your own monad. Think about it. Previously, we discussed how Christianity presented Christ as a static way, as if he was the end of the road. By the same token, wherever you deem God to be residing, whether it be Sanat Kumara, the planetary logos or the solar logos, they are not standing still either. As you approach where each of these mighty monads are now, they will have moved on. They are walking their own way. All that we have discussed so far about the science of the Antahkarana can be summed up in this diagram. Take some time to study it. Each funnel represents a triad, humanity currently operates through matter, using active intelligence to master the first triad. They then begin to build the Antahkarana, taking 3 initiations along the way. As a fully realized first self, the monad has rooted itself in the second triad, but does not become a second self until it takes the I-4. This is the lighted way, which continues through the I-5 until the monad reaches the third triad. It is only when the monad takes the I-6 that it enters the way of higher evolution. That will eventually take it out of the solar system altogether. It is at the I-7 that the monad now has full consciousness of all events that have ever transpired within the solar system. This is known as solar systemic consciousness. The sequence of initiations has been presented previously in tabulated form and shown here again. You can pause the video and examine each step at your leisure. I cannot remember, but this table may also be presented in the notes accompanying a previous presentation. In the 27th and last presentation of the science of the Antahkarana, we will look further into the initiatory steps a disciple takes along the full path, not just up to the I-3. We will relate this to some of the illustrious beings that have already walked this path. Finally, we will ponder on where this massive effort finally lands us, at the foothills of the Council of Shambhala. Thank you.